A federal government-commissioned inquiry into the $16 billion school stimulus package has found a small percentage of projects didn't give value for money, but it supported the thrust of the program. Its interim report was released on the campaign trail in Melbourne, with the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, saying she didn't want to avoid scrutiny. The Prime Minister says she would launch the program all over again if it meant avoiding recession during a global financial crisis. Political editor Heather Hewitt with more.
We made a judgment to invest in schools and to avoid recession.
Waste is never justified. Waste is never justified.
We have received 254 complaints, which is 2.7% of all schools.
It was one of those days when the business of government merged with the election campaign.
Can I start by saying that I welcome this report. I welcome the scrutiny that this report brings. It has 14 recommendations and the government accepts them all. If re-elected, we will implement each of them.
An interim report on the government's school building stimulus program, BER, by former investment banker Brad Ogle was released this morning and dominated questioning of Julia Gillard on the campaign trail.
Did some things go wrong? Yes, they did, and I've acknowledged that publicly. The insulation scheme became a mess. I obviously wanted to make sure we had more of a focus on value for money in building the education revolution. That's why I created the task force led by Mr Orgill.
The majority of complaints raise, in our opinion, very valid concerns, particularly about value for money and school-level involvement in decision-making.
He concludes that the valid complaints by schools are in the order of 2.7%.
Now, sure, not all schools have complained about their project, but that doesn't mean that value for money has been achieved.
In the scheme of things, complaints by 2.7% of the 9,000 schools around the country doesn't sound a lot. But in an election campaign, it's apparently still enough for the opposition to make this claim. It will repeat right up till election day.
The Ogle report seems to demonstrate that Julia Gillard is not fit to be a minister, let alone the Prime Minister of this country. If you can't be trusted to manage a $16 billion program properly, you certainly can't be trusted to manage the $350 billion a year budget of the Commonwealth properly.
But there is one very crucial point the opposition leader ignores, and one the government can rightly be relieved about. That is, despite the complaints, the report makes this conclusion.
Our overall observation is that this Australia-wide program is delivering much-needed infrastructure to school communities while achieving the primary goal of economic activity across the nation.
Of course, from this report, we have learned some lessons. And the lessons that we've learned go to the execution of the program, execution for the future, which is where Mr Orgill's recommendations come in. But I want to say this very clearly. I made a judgment about saving the country from recession by investing in schools. I stand by that judgment and I would make it again today.
Of the 2.7% of complaints, half were about New South Wales schools.
The complaints are very concentrated in the New South Wales system. If you look beyond that, 80% of the program, there's very few complaints, and therefore the implementation looks to have gone very smoothly.
And with that, the campaign moved on.
Product placement.
Julia Gillard was in her hometown of Melbourne.
Very dramatic, the choice for the 21st of August. You're hanging out at the back. Hey, how are you?
Are you having a barbie, said you not?
I'm not sure the bosses are agreeing with that. Oh, lost my shoe.
Can I put your shoe on?
Oh, thank you.
You have a lovely day.
Thank you.
I hope you win.
I think it's time for a cup of tea.
Tony Abbott was on the trail in Tasmania.
These cauliflower ears are not just the result of packing down in too many scrums, they are the result of his teeth chewing my ear.
I'm a warrior for a long time.
There's a very good book I can recommend called Battle Lines. Wouldn't be a day on the campaign trail without holding a baby. Can I have just a little cuddle? I think Harriet probably is thinking to herself, why am I being surrounded by all these funny people?
And political leaders of days gone by seem to be everywhere.
Please believe that we can win this election. Please believe that.
Is the coalition ready for government?
No.
No?
No.
Are you frustrated that you have had distractions, the Rudd factor, constant questions about Kevin Rudd? Has that taken away some valuable time for you? And where do you go from here?
How I'm feeling is full of vim, vigour and fight.
Whatever the voters' views on this campaign and its unusual twists and turns, after a High Court decision today, more Australians will now be able to vote on August the 21st. That's because legislative changes brought in by the Howard government to force the closure of the electoral roll on the day election writs are issued have been ruled unconstitutional.
There are 100,000 people who will now be on the roll that wouldn't have otherwise been there, and in a very, very tight election scenario, that could absolutely make the difference.
Could that explain why the opposition is very lukewarm about the ruling and Labor is celebrating?
Heather Hewitt with that report.